Suddenly, good afternoon. I hope all the people have joined or joining. Are you people able to hear me?
Yes, Pradeep, I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, because I was connecting and I was not seeing anybody till 6 o'clock.
Well, I mean, it was saying that you are in probably some another meeting, something like that. It was showing. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. I could not enter.
Oh, some mess up. Okay, but actually, I had joined 5 minutes earlier.
Yeah, I tried to join 5 minutes early as well, but I was not permitted. It said you were.
I almost ended up writing an email to Suraj with copy to you saying that, like, look, this is what the error is showing me. If everything is fine.
Okay, so shall we get started? I think we should not delay. Let me start recording.
I think already in progress, it looks like.
Yeah, it's recording. It is recording. And Suraj is there and Amog is there as well.
May I go ahead and share my screen, Professor Pradeep?
Yeah, I suppose so. I see Ravi around and Tiju there and Susie. I don't know whether she has joined. She will be joining soon, I suppose. So let's get started, Sachin. And yeah.
Okay.
So as you know, it is 25 minutes and 5 minutes of questions.
Sure.
So we are 3 minutes delayed right now. Okay. Thank you for please.
I can try to wrap it up. I presume that my screen is visible and I'm audible, so I can go ahead.
Yeah, you're.
Right. Okay. So good evening, everyone, and thank you, Professor Pradeep, for giving this opportunity to give the glimpses of what we do in the aerosol group at IIT Madras. And I would start with this very fascinating picture of the grass pollens, which we have taken under the fluorescence microscope, and you can see that this is part of the aerosols and how interesting they could be as far as the health and climate is concerned. That's what I'm really going to talk about it. So this is just as an outline, not necessarily that I'll give you the weightage or the sequence related to what I'm showing, but just to let you know that what lies in front in this particular talk is concerned. I would like to start by dedicating my association with Professor Paul Crutzen, who was awarded a Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1995 for related to the ozone. And why I want to bring his name is because he has introduced this very powerful term Anthropocene, which basically means that the new epoch where the earth is now more governed by the anthropogenic or the human activities than any sort of a natural activity. And one of the glimpses which we can see that a very drastic increase over the last 300 years, if you compare CO2 or methane, like, you know, this is an unprecedented increase which is governed by the human activity than anything else. But it's not only related with the CO2 and methane, but then we have really seen that an increase in the PM2.5 concentration as well due to the human activities. And then PM2.5 and aerosol, these are basically the two sides of the same coin. Depending upon how you characterize and what you want to learn out of them, you can use that term in an exchange. And that's what I'm probably also going to do for this particular talk. So it's not only CO2 and methane, which are greenhouse gases, but the aerosols also have increased over the last 200 years or so. So just for the orientation purpose, what the aerosols are? Well, these are the tiny suspended particles in the atmosphere, a medium, because they are governed by the different laws. That's the reason we call them an aerosol. Now, the problem which we face with the aerosol is that we have to really look into the 6th order of magnitude size range when we are trying to characterize them for any particular reason. And they have a diverse characteristics. It could be sulfate, secondary organic material, soot, mineral dust. When you talk about the biological part of it, it is protein, viruses, bacteria, pollen, so on and so forth. When I talk about the sources of these aerosols, either they are primarily emitted in the atmosphere, and they can also be formed secondarily where the gas to particle conversion can happen, and that's what we call it as a secondary organic aerosol. Once they are in the atmosphere, either they can undergo the transformation and aging, meaning that their physical and chemical properties are changing. But the most important is that these aerosols, they do play in the formation of clouds. And if there are no clouds, there will be no rain, and there is no rain, no water. So in a sense, as Professor Andy Andrews says, that in a sense we owe our existence to the aerosol. If there are no aerosols, no life would be there on the Earth's atmosphere, on the Earth's surface. So in a nutshell, what do the aerosols they do is that they kind of affect the atmosphere and climate, and then if they are biological in nature, more often they affect the human health as well. Now, why are we basically worried about the aerosol as compared to the other things? So now this is a typical IPCC picture, which tries to tell you that what are the atmospheric constituents which try to warm the Earth's surface, and then the one which kind of tries to cool the Earth's surface. Now, if you look into this year's Nobel Prize in Physics, it was very encouraging to see that it was awarded to two scientists, those who have really helped us in reducing this uncertainty, meaning that if you look into the estimates of the warming due to the CO2 and other greenhouse gases, the error bars are very small. So what it means is that we have very good understanding that if you emit this much of CO2, how much the temperature is going to increase. But the moment you come to the aerosol, and particularly the aerosol cloud precipitation interaction, that error bar itself is pretty larger than the estimates. So when you try to calculate the net radiative forcing or the net temperature change, this error bar transmits as it is into the net estimates, and it tells us that the aerosol cloud precipitation interaction represents the largest uncertainty in the current and future understanding of the climate change. Not only that, even the IPCC themselves, they state that the level of confidence which they have in its estimates are even very low as compared to any other estimates. So what we as a climate scientists try to do in that? Well, it's pretty complicated, and without going into this flowchart, what I will try to say is that what we basically need, if we need a very good laboratory experiments related to the aerosol, India specific is that we need a very good field measurement campaign, or we also need the representative laboratory experiments, which can be upscaled into the cloud property and aerosol property models, which can then be upscaled into the regional atmospheric models, and then to the global modeling, and then to the global climate model. So now this flowchart basically tries to tells me is that I as a Sachin or my group at IIT Madras or only IIT Madras or two institutions in India cannot really help in reducing this climate uncertainty. Now the climate change, for that particular reason, that everybody has to work in tandem across the globe, at least to try to contribute little bit in each of the boxes. So we in India basically focus on this particular box where we do a lot of field measurement campaign, and then because we generate a very high quality data, it is good for us that the top-notch people in this particular field are always eager to collaborate with us. So this is just a very big thank and acknowledgement to my collaborator, like Uli Pearson from Max Planck Institute, and then Scott Martin from Harvard, Yuko from Manchester, Pei Fei Liu. And these are the various topics which we work upon, and then we closely work in association with the specific topics which they have. Now, what is our approach towards this? Our focal points are, we try to understand the aerosol chemistry and physics, then also try to understand their cloud forming ability, because as I said, like the aerosols are important for the cloud formation. And over the 50 years that the aerosol properties are changing over the Indian region, and that you definitely see that it's affecting the monsoon, like the recent extreme events in Kerala. It is definitely due to the changing aerosol properties. Then important is the bioaerosol for the health aspect, but they are also important for climate. I'll talk about it. And then we do a lot of climate modeling. How do we do that? Our scientific approach is we try to combine the laboratory field and model studies, where we try to use advanced physical, chemical, and biological techniques, particularly looking into the field measurement campaigns. Now, just to kind of give you the glimpses of some of the results which we have obtained over the last 5 years. Now, this very typical problem of the severe haze in Delhi, like, everybody says that if you have ever been to Delhi during winter, your flight is getting delayed because the visibility is low. Now, prima facie, what everybody knows is that when you have a high PM 2.5 concentration, then you have the aerosols which have the high hygroscopicity, meaning that they have the very high ability to uptake the water so that they can swell big enough. And then this high RH condition, which generally persists during the winter in Delhi because the temperatures are very lower. Now, what we try to see is that everybody really knew this, but why it should really cause a decrease in visibility only in Delhi and nowhere else? Like, why doesn't it happen everywhere else? So our recent paper in Geosciences tried to answer this question. Now, if you look into the chemical composition of PM1, that is a particulate matter or an aerosol which is less than 1 micron in aerodynamic diameter, across the globe, when there are measurements across the 30 locations, what we found is that they are mostly dominated by organics, followed by sulfate, followed by nitrate, and then ammonia. Now, what we found in Delhi which is consistent with the previous measurements, is that unlike any other part of the globe, we do see like 10% chloride in that. And this was a big mystery that in PM1, where does this chloride comes from? So what we did is that when we did this campaign in Delhi in 2018, we also found a very high chloride, but did not know where does it come from. But now the aerosol instruments being very expensive, we had only one instrument. So what we did is that we waited for 1 year, and during January 2019, we conducted a similar field measurement campaign in Chennai. Now we put the hypothesis is that this chloride basically comes from some sort of a burning, particularly the plastic burning. And interestingly, what we found in Chennai, that except for the day of Bhogi, that is 14th of January, which generally coincides with some sort of an ritual auspicious activity where we try to burn something, the rest of the days excluding Bhogi, Chennai really behaved as like the 30 global sites, which I showed on the previous slide. But on the day of Bhogi, Chennai really behaved like Delhi, meaning that there were 21% chloride. Now that hypothesis was really matching, that there is some sort of a burning which is happening, and that is the reason the chloride is going on. So we took that data, put into a lot of thermodynamic models, did a lot of crunching. And what we found is that when you burn this specific type of plastic, and then this metal prickling industry in Delhi particularly, where they use a lot of HCl to clean the metals or to shine it. Now it has an HCl emission in the atmosphere. And then you have this ammonia, which is coming from the agricultural and livestock activity. So once you have that, you obviously get the ammonium chloride in the aerosol bulk. Now, what does this aerosol, the ammonium chloride basically does, that once it is kind of the particle is formed or it is in the particle. Now, what we saw in Delhi, if you look into the PM1 concentration in Delhi, the moment it reaches 90 microgram per meter cube, it is all chloride. If you look into here, that sulfate is decreasing after 90, nitrate is remaining constant after 90, organics is remaining constant after 90. So every increase in PM1, PM2.5 mass after 90 microgram per meter cube, it's caused by chloride. But if the chloride is not increasing, what is happening? Now, interestingly, what happens when you have an aerosol in the atmosphere, you have this HCl gas condensing on that. Once it condenses, obviously, along with the water, the co-condensation happens, which is a very basic term used in chemistry, the co-condensation. Now, once this ammonium chloride goes into the particles, it basically increases their water uptake ability exponentially. Now, once the relative humidity crosses 40-45%, you can see that the water uptake ability is exponentially increasing, whereas all other chemical composition are remaining constant. So what happens is that even at the 96% relative humidity, a small particle can really swell big enough, surface to the volume ratio really increases, and they can really drastically cause the reduction in the visibility. So eventually we can then relate the reduction in the visibility to the plastic burning, and that's what really we have basically found. Now, the second important thing which we found during the lockdown, we might have really heard that during the lockdown, a lot of people saying that the pollution went down, pollution laid down, Himalaya was visible, everything. But we went one step ahead and found a very interesting underlying processes. Now, what this graph shows is that this is the time from 11th April till 6th of May. Now, if you look into this black line, which basically shows the black carbon emissions from the anthropogenic activity. Now, interestingly, during the lockdown, this persistently remained less than 3 microgram per meter cube, meaning that generally on a business as usual day, this would be around like 25 to 30 microgram per meter cube, meaning that there was an order of lower concentration during the lockdown. However, even if anthropogenic activity was less, what we found on 1st of May that there was an extremely high PM2.5 concentration, which we observed here, and as well as the US Embassy data suggests that. So we were really kind of worried that where does this basically come from when the anthropogenic activity is not there. So when we looked into the physical characteristics of these particular events, what we found on 1st of May, as your time progressed, if this is the diameter and if this is color scaled by the concentration, what we found is that as the time progressed, not only that the particle diameter increased, but its concentration also really was very high. Like it went up to, by number concentration, went up to like 10,000 particle per cc. But that was not enough for us to explain where does it come from. So when we looked into the chemistry of this, and then for this particular period, we made a pie chart, what we found is that almost 53% was sulfate. Now, this is something which is extremely unheard of, that when you don't have an anthropogenic activity, where does this sulfate come from? So again, we took this chemistry and physics and then put it into these different thermodynamic models. So what it basically tried to tell us is that, of course, when you have this bacteria, marine bacteria, they release this DMS, dimethyl sulfide. Now, this dimethyl sulfide undergoes a very complex reaction to give you the H2SO4 through MSA, methanosulfuric acid. And then generally, when you have the high concentration of aerosols, this particular MSA or H2SO4 can condense on the pre-existing particles. But since the anthropogenic level were very low, that provided them an opportunity to even nucleate themselves and form the pure sulfate particles. Now, this is an important finding for us because then we now understand, in the absence of anthropogenic activity or before the human they started messing up with the atmosphere, how under the natural conditions the natural clouds were basically formed. Because now when we have the base, because unlike the greenhouse gases, we do not have any base that whether the clouds were cooling or clouds were warming the Earth's surface. Because depending upon their height and type, they can do both. But for greenhouse gases for 1750, we do have some sort of a base. But for the clouds, we do not have the base. But this is the one good state to understand that maybe when the anthropogenic activities were not there, all your particles were sulfate. For the constraint of time, I will kind of just skip this and then go to the bioaerosols in general. Now, the bioaerosols basically, which is again the type of the aerosols which are biological in origin, either you can talk about the fungal spores, bacteria, pollen grains, so on and so forth. Now, these bioaerosols, they represent even the larger amount of challenges for us. Now, what happens is when there is a cloud formation or if there is a precipitation formation, if you look into the deep convective cloud where the ice nucleation is happening, the homogeneous ice nucleation generally happens at the temperature around minus 80 degrees centigrade. But if there are aerosols, meaning there is a seed for a water to condense, but if the seed is non-bioaerosol, it requires like minus 30 to minus 40 degrees centigrade. But if you have the bioaerosol presence, they can form the ice nuclei at minus 3 to minus 10 degrees centigrade. Now, in any of the climate model which tries to predict the rainfall or which tries to predict the cloud formation, the bioaerosol schemes are not there. So meaning that what happening, the presence of the bioaerosol is not only preponing the cloud formation, but in majority of the cases, it can even prepone the precipitation formation. And since you don't have this scheme in the models, your models are really failing to catch up that particular event. Now, if you look into this particular paper, which was like in a PNAS, it says that all non-bioaerosol can have this is the ice nuclei concentration and this is the temperature. You can see that like, the bioaerosol concentration, the ice nuclei concentration due to bioaerosol can reach the saturation just well before minus 10 degrees centigrade. So why do they do that? Well, of course, they have this protein structure. Their structure is in such a way that they are very effective in removing the latent rate. So the moment they remove the latent rate, they can increase it. In addition to that, the other major worry is that this was an excellent paper in Nature by Fisher et al., where they say that the plant infecting fungi are on increase, right? And then we have also really found that over the period of time, we use this publicly available data set from the ProMed, and then you can really see that the fungal attack on the plants is on increase. So if we are currently talking about the human pandemic, but if we don't pay attention today, maybe 20 years down the line, we would be talking about the plant pandemic. Now, coming back to this ice nuclei study, what we did, we collected the rainfall data, and then we collected the aerosol on the filter paper and then tried to obtain the closure on this. So what we found is that this bacilli, because we do the DNA analysis on that, we have this protocol that you take the filter and extract the DNA and then do the standard DNA analysis, and you can go up to the species level. Now what we found here is that there is a very diverse bacteria. Now look at this example. This is the super cooled water at minus 7 degrees centigrade. But the moment you kind of put this Pseudomonas syringae bacteria in that, the water immediately freezes. Whereas if you want to freeze that water by using some other non-bioaerosol, you need the temperature of around like minus 30 to minus 40 degrees centigrade. This is how effective the ice nuclei they are. This is again the plant-related study. What we basically found is that the crops like wheat and rice are highly vulnerable, right? They are really suffering a lot of damages over the Indian region over the last 25 years or so. That attack is increasing. So we need to better understand what type of fungal these are, because for the crops, if you use a very specific type of fungicide, it may not be very effective unless we really understand those fungal spores up to the species level. Just to kind of wrap that up in another couple of minutes, that what we want to do it in future. Well, one of the very important aspect about these aerosols is that a lot of people, they try to correlate the increase in the PM 2.5 concentration related with the mortality, right? But these studies are primarily dependent upon the simple dose response relation, right? They do not really talk about any sort of a physiological connection and the toxicity, what happens in that. But what we found in the recent times is that whatever happens in the body is something similar to what happens in the atmosphere. So you have these reactive oxygenated species. We are now talking about the reactive chlorine species because the chlorine has very high reactivity as compared to the oxygenated species. Now what happens is that the moment these reactive oxygenated species are inhaled in the body, what they try to do is that they try to take out the electron from the cell, and then more consistently it happens, it kind of causes the oxidative stress on the body. Now once that oxidative stress happens, obviously it triggers the false alarm in your immune system, and then it develops the allergy, right? So that allergy, like the moment you have this epithelial lining fluid, and then once these reactions are taking place into the epithelial lining fluid, the allergy further increases, and obviously we know that it has a very adverse health effect. So what we really understood before the real biology takes into the effect, or before it triggers it, it is a typical chemistry which we have understood, or which we understand about the chlorine, nitrate, or oxygenated species. How do they basically oxidize something which is there? Now, how do we basically try to adjust that? Well, what we basically need to do is that we need to do the kinetic experiments, cellular studies, field measurements, epidemiological studies, and regional global climate modeling. But one of the important link in that is this field measurement campaigns. And that is what exactly we are doing in our group, that we are now under the process of collecting a very high quality data under the diverse environment. Now, one of these efforts to collect these particular data is that we have recently established a lab in Munnar, at a high altitude laboratory in Munnar. And one of the reasons that why we have done it in Munnar, because during the monsoon season, you can study the aerosol properties and cloud formation under an extremely natural condition. If you are lucky, maybe a day or few hours you can get that you can understand the aerosol formation process and cloud formation in a natural condition. And for the same time, during the winter season, it really brings a lot of polluted air. So it is a one place where we definitely get the contrasting wind, and then try to understand the contrasting location for that. Just the last slide. So yes, what we know, I'm showing this climate and atmosphere in green because we do have some understanding that the aerosol definitely are important, and we need to understand their physical, chemical, and biological properties, seasonal variation, and distinct environment through better understand their climate effects, like either on visibility or extreme climate events, so on and so forth. But when it comes to the health effect, like what we know the health effect is, like of course they can cause the stress due to various radicals, then how the body responds to the toxicity, and then the immunological response. But for that, we better need to understand the PM2.5 radical chemistry, then most important is secondary organic aerosol formation, and then how these multi-phase processes takes care in the surface chemistry moment they kind of like enter the human body. And that is the real challenge, and that's the reason I'm kind of showing that into the orange color basically. Yeah, so with this, I think I'm sorry that I took 1 minute extra than what was allotted, but we'll be very happy to answer the question.
Well, you have done a fantastic job. Wonderful. You took only 21 minutes. You're supposed to, you have a few more minutes actually. Good that we can ask some good number of questions.
Sure.
Well, let me start by asking one or two questions, and then for want of time, I may not, get into all the questions that I want to. Well, the first thing is, you talked about bionuclei resulting in supercooled water is freezing earlier.
Right.
Do we understand the molecular reasons why the bionuclei do this?
Yeah. So I believe that up to the molecular level, we do not understand it. As of now, the hypothesis is, since you have this protein structure, now if you look into the structure of this protein and then the typical bond angle of the water, so what they say that this mapping is so effective that this protein structure is probably more effective in removing that latent heat for freezing than any other aerosol. But at the molecular level, what is happening? Probably we do not have even a simple model to explain that why they basically do at different temperatures. Because that question, I mean, this is again the same thing, right? Now, if I look at the temperature here, -15, there are different bioaerosols they are doing at a different temperatures. So there is indeed a bit of a complication to understand it up to the molecular level, that why are they so effective in removing the latent heat. So we do not have that understanding.
So you're essentially saying that a large biomolecules have a lot of internal degrees of freedom that can capture a lot of energy. So you put this into whatever, you will pull all this energy and result in, fast crystallization. So if that is the case, shall I simply put some proteins or polymers inside? And will that result in this exactly the same phenomenon?
Yes, the proteins are known to do that. I do not know about the polymers, but that's really an exciting idea, like to put some polymers. The proteins, they do it. Polymers, I do not know. I'll just write it down.
So the fact that polymers, bio can exist in air because of aerosol, etc., you do have this phenomenon, whereas polymers, you cannot put it into the atmosphere because of whatever is the reason why it cannot go in. So if you are in a position to induce that,
yes,
you could do so. And that's a very interesting thought. Okay, second
course,
question. Yeah.
If we can form the ice nuclei at the temperature of -1 degree centigrade, unbelievable.
Fantastic. So I have some, some ideas in that. We can discuss that later. But, you said about chloride, your first paper that you presented, very nice. Now, in that context, do we know the chemical nature of that chloride? Let us say, if you were to have chloride of organic type, like methyl chloride or some chloride, versus chloride of inorganic kind, which is hydrogen chloride, or some other kind of chloride. Now, is there any kind of differentiation or speciation effect in this?
Yeah, so that's an interesting observation. What we believe, based on the technique which we measure, it is all sort of an inorganic chloride. But as you said, that some sort of this plastic burning, this long chain compound, I do believe that some of them could be even an organic. But that's, as you said, that it is a very open question, right? Further type of that chloride. As of now, we assume that it is to be all inorganic chloride.
Some kind of isotopic labeling or some studies of that kind, if that can greatly result in better understanding of that. All right, I stop here and take other questions this may have.
Sure.
Sir, can you hear me?
Krishnarka, yes, go ahead.
Sir, I have a two-part question, sir. The first one is like the aerosols are known to scatter the light and overall reduce the temperature of the earth. So is there any concentration or balance between the aerosol concentration and also the greenhouse gases? So that greenhouse gases does increase the temperature and then aerosols lowers the temperature. Can we get a balance between these two? And if it is, what will be the balance? And the second question is like, we have observed the anions help in agglomerating this particulate matter. So imagine if we have a large scale anion generator, and then we just release anions into the atmosphere, and that will help in condensing the particulate matter, maybe at the highest concentration to, if it will settle down, they can cleaning that condensate would be easy. Is that possible?
So I'll answer your first question. Indeed, yes, the aerosols, they do reflect the sunlight, right? So depending upon their nature, so that's the other complication. Let's just suppose if you have a black carbon aerosol, which as a soot, for example, from vehicular exhaust, that will absorb the incoming solar radiation and that will supplement the greenhouse effect. But if you have an aerosol which is kind of white in nature, which will reflect the sunlight back, that will negate the greenhouse effect. So what we know for now, the total aerosol radiation interaction is cooling the Earth's surface. But even in that also we have the large uncertainty because we don't know how much is the soot and how much is the sulfate and how much is the dust. So that is more complicated. But what we know for now with some uncertainty is that the aerosol themselves with the direct interaction with the sunlight is negating the greenhouse effect. So that's your first question. The second question is the negative ion. I don't really believe that you can cause the coagulation of the particle to make them settle. That's simply not possible. The physics doesn't allow that. That's number one. The number two is that if you put how many machines you want to put in a city like Delhi, because this atmosphere is really well mixed, right? It has no boundaries. When you talk about the vehicle, for example, whatever the vehicle is emitting, if you just want to characterize for that particular vehicle, that is a good study. But there are million vehicles like this. If not in Delhi, north of you. If not, then the east of you, right? So that's something I personally do not believe it could be a feasible solution. But then that is something with the technology aspect, what people want to do and how do they want to do it.
Like what I've done was like in a small beaker, I inserted the soot which we get from burning agarbatti, that incense stick, and then when I applied a negative ion generator inside that bottle, and I could clearly see a haze was there, and then it completely settled down.
Yeah,
And there have been
the particles which you get from that agarbatti are just like 10,000 particles per cc in a confined way, right? But you're talking about controlling it in Delhi, right?
Yes, sir, like extreme conditions, not the
fine. I don't know.
or at the source, if you can control at the source, because it is so dynamic in nature. If you can control it is at the source, maybe we could reduce the overall.
Different types of engines are coming, right?
We have 1 more minute if you have another question. Otherwise, I'm going to ask one more question. Okay, colleagues, I don't hear a question, so therefore let me ask this question that, well, your entire science depends on a lot of people, a lot of inputs, and it is also a long time. And let us say from what you just now said about the first paper and cast it or sort of look at it for the past 100 years, you see that the plastics evolved at a certain point in history. And you see that plastics itself, variety, Abhijit is here, I see, at different stages, different plastics came into history. And do you have a correlation between the plastics emergence and proliferation in the kind of aerosol chemistry that you see?
Yeah, so that's something which is, it's really a very challenging task, as you said, right? Because we do not have that long-term data. And then one of the problems which we face is that these aerosol instruments themselves are very expensive, right? So we need to have a long-term measurements, of course, which we are now doing. We are kind of trying to put a lab in Delhi where we want to have a measurement going for 3 years, right? But yes, I mean, that is something which would and should definitely be the future, right? How does, and not only plastic, right? Even the livestock activities or your engine change and then the quality of the fuel, everything has to be correlated with that, right? But I think it is a mammoth task, and that's the reason we need more and more collaborations in this direction, that everybody tries to kind of fill in the dots, and then in the end, those are connected. But yes, that is definitely a challenging task, and then we must really go on that path.
With available data, it's somewhere in some parts of the world, some data will be available. If you can put those dots.
So the longest correlation. What happens is, although people, they have the instruments, no, Professor Pradeep, they don't really want to kind of get into this long term, because you go to one particular place, you get so interesting information about this underlying process and mechanism, and that drives them to a very high quality paper, right? So of course, I mean, as you rightly said, this is a very important issue that, like, sometimes you have to step back and say that, like, look, if you want to do a very long-term solution to this, so stop doing this, but then really have a long-term measurement at one point. So I think the longest data which we have from the Jungfrau in Switzerland, it's probably like 2 years, not more than that.
Thank you, Sachin. It was a loaded presentation with lots of enthusiasm and intensity and good amount of physics and chemistry and engineering and biology. So very nice. That is the kind of science that we need, and that's what will get better and better papers. And so thank you, very nice. And I suppose it has seeded many thoughts in the minds of people. Let's go to the next presentation. Yeah. The next speaker is supposed to be Susie, and I don't see her. Is she here?
Sir, she was there, just now she left.
Oh, she was there. Okay, so hopefully some connection problem. Abhijit, do you know?
Sir, she rejoined.
She rejoined. Okay, Susie, can you please make your presentation? 20 minutes, I will give you a warning. 25 minutes, you need to stop. Are you hearing?
Yeah, hello, sorry. Yeah, I had a problem in joining, so.
Okay, can you please share your screen?
Yes, yeah. Is it visible?
Not yet come. It is 6:36.
Is it coming?
Not yet.
I'm sorry. I did share screen, so okay.
Yeah, it has come full screen, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is it better?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, good evening. I'm just going to go talking about something that we have been doing since 2014, I would say, with our PhD student, Jacob John. So this work that I'm going to describe here is about plant cell wall material called pectin, which is a polysaccharide, which I have been associating with Professor Abhijit here, who's here as well. And we also have been associating with the Dr. Debesh Ray and V.K. Aswal from VARC Mumbai, mostly for the purpose of SANS data that we required. So I'll be discussing mostly the work that is dissipation and strain stiffening behavior observed in pectin gels, which is cross-linked using calcium, which we do rheological behavior studies that we have done. And another work which we have just submitted, which is again related to pectin itself, which is related to pectin, as you all would know, is an integral part of plant cell wall. And so it also is used in many other applications also. So I'll get into my topics itself. So if we look at pectin, it's all in plants and the applications. So as you can see, it's a component of the primary cell wall of plants. It may have many functions. It also is known to have some functions in the mechanics of cell operations in plant. Not only just its growth, for example, extension. It is also assumed that it may have a role in the mechanics of stomata opening and closing, which is a very important function in the case of plants for evapotranspiration functions that it has to serve. Pectin also, we are all aware of its, use in, for example, in jam. For example, when you make jams at home, if you want to thicken it, that is one of the things that we add by, either squeezing some lemon juice into the, the jam when you're making it. So basically, the property of certain properties of pectin makes it thick. Pectin is also used in some applications such as, it's also proposed to be used in some drug release agent, because it's also what you call biocompatible polymer. It can be probably done as a gel. It can be used for many biomedical applications. It is also envisaged to use in some electronic applications. So why are we interested in this pectin? One of the things is that, as you can see from this abstract I'm showing here, the cell wall mechanics and growth control in plants, the role of pectins revisited. So it's though it has been in vogue for many years, the interest in understanding the role of pectin in plant growth mechanics is something that is of current interest to many researchers who work in plant-related biology, as well as to people like us who work on rheology of materials or polymeric materials. Similarly, another important thing in cell mechanics, this is associated with, so one of the important things about pectin is it's also going to be coming, and it can form a gel, as I said. Many biological biomicromolecules, are known to form what are known as a network, a gel network, like, for example, fibrin, actin, all this forms some kind of a network. And they undergo something like a stiffening when you apply a particular strain. So it's basically, despite their notorious diversity, biological cells are mechanically well characterized by only few robust universal laws. And one of the laws that is governing that is the nonlinear response to stretch. That means when you're stretching the cells, they undergo a kind of nonlinear deformation, and this is what is called as stiffening. And they also can undergo what is known as a softening when you make them undergo stretching. So these two are the background of the work that I'm going to explain now in this case. This is actually what is meant by strain stiffening and softening, which is observed in F-actin, which is found in other organisms like human biological cells and other cells. In the exoskeleton of cells, this F-actin is there. This is, for example, is showing what is meant by strain stiffening and softening. So you can see the curve which is shown on the in A, for example. It has this upward swing when it is deforming, and whereas in the case in the other case there is a concave and convex a swing to the curve, which you can consider as this strain stiffening and softening of the material when you're subjecting into certain strain. So on the x-axis it is strain here, and the y-axis it is stress that is shown here. Okay, so I'll come to what we have done using pectin. The pectin we have used for our experiments is something that we see in normally in plant cell walls, which is known as the low methoxypectin, which means its methyl esterified carbon groups is less than 50%. There is a high methoxy version of the pectin also, which is also found in plants, and they do undergo changes using an enzyme, methyl esterase. It can actually go from high methoxy to low methoxy, and vice versa. So what this molecule has is of interest to us is this polygalactronic acid group that is shown here, which can, in the presence of calcium, the carboxylic acid groups here can go physical network and form what are known as egg box dimers. Okay, so these two parallel, so the polysaccharide chains that are shown here are shown here as like the curled chain here, and the red dots are the calcium that is sitting or nesting inside this chains here. So when the calcium concentration that is given as R here, so when it is low, it forms this kind of dimers, or when the calcium cross-linking is, the ratio is high, it can form either single point cross-link or form networks of this. So calcium cross-link, not only just the dimers are formed, sometimes these dimers also bundle together and form stiffer parts in the network. So in the gel, when it is forming, the assumption is that this is known that they form this kind of egg box bundles or egg box dimers. And it has been shown that there are various patterns for this dimer bundling possible. This is using molecular simulation experiments. Molecular simulation results, people have shown that they can form different patterns of this dimer association. So the extent and type of this egg box bundle changes with calcium, and also with the pectin concentration in the. For example, if I'm making a pectin solution, I can vary the pectin concentration, and that also can affect. We have shown that when the pectin concentration is low or high, depending upon the entanglement concentration of the polymer, you may end up with different kinds of such structures. So let's see what happens when we do this particular. So what are we interested? As I said, we are also looking at two different aspects. This pectin is also found in plant seeds. I may have to go ahead a little bit. So for example, we have all probably eaten something called faluda, and faluda has this transparent seed-like particles in the. So I don't know how many of you know that it is called sabja seeds. It is nothing but the tulsi or the basil that we have in our backyard. So if the seeds, if you take and put it in water, it forms this kind of a gel. So it is to make you feel that this pectin is nothing but that is present in such materials as well. So this is known as seed mucilage. So this seed mucilage is also very interesting material. So I'll go back to the pectin rheology soon after this. So when you put the basil seed in water, it swells up like this, and it has an exudate, that blue color part that we have shown here. It's basically cellulose microfibrils along with the pectin, and there is a non-adherent layer which is at the outer part, which is about 80 to 90% pectin, water soluble part. Okay, it also again has some amount of little bit of cellulose in it. So basically, so this material is also we have studied because again, it is also pectin in some form that is there, but nobody, there are biochemical experiments to show that what is the composition and how it is sitting in the seed, etc. But there are no reports on what is the mechanical behavior of this mucilage which is coming out of the seed looks like. Is it something that is similar to a synthetic pectin mix that if I make it in the lab and do the experiment? So what we do is we take this mucilage out and do similar experiments to that we are doing in with so when it is exuding, these are our own microscopy experiments that you can see here. The transparent material that is exuding out from the or sitting around the seed is the mucilage, seed mucilage we are talking about. So when you put it in water, you can see that it in few seconds, like about 200 seconds, the seed swells up and it has this hairy like appearance around the seed, which is nothing but a soft gel-like material. So we did some experiments with that too. Okay, so the questions that we are asking here are, for example, if you have this low methoxy pectin, which is calcium cross-linked, so it is well known that many biological macromolecules, when they are networked or when they do show what is known as a strain stiffening behavior. Examples are fibrin, which is found in our body, or for example, actin, which is also in our muscles. These are all known to show strain stiffening behavior. So this has some biological functional implications in animals, for example. Similarly, in plants also, this is actually probably contributing to their, for example, plants are also subjected to a lot of forces, external physical forces, for example, while growing, as well as, for example, wind load or other criteria, other external forces that comes in, or for example, temperature changes. So what is accommodating these changes in the plant? So if you look at the plant cell wall, it has multiple components, as we can see. But the main components, if you look at, it is pectin, cellulose, and hemicellulose. And then you have the plasma membrane, which is inside. So it has to be accommodated. So you can see that structurally there is a contribution from cellulose and hemicellulose. What is the contribution from pectin, which is actually a soft material which will swell up in water? Is it also so? Though there are certain things that we learn in school, for example, plants do take up water from the soil through some absorption process. But at the same time, we are not very clear what is the process through which actually the water is entering the plant body. So we know that it is getting transported through xylem and phloem and all these concepts we study. But at the same time, if you take any plant cell, for example, 60 to 70% is water. So where is this water accommodated? So is it in cellulose is not known to be a water accommodating material, or neither hemicellulose or lignin. So these are all not water accommodating materials. So where does the water go and sit in this system? So that is also an interesting question that one can ask here. And what is the role played by when the water is there, when in the presence? So so when this pectin, when it is cross-linked with calcium, it forms a gel, which means it's a two-phase system with water as the second fluid medium and pectin molecules as the solid phase in this case. So they can swell to a large extent, and that's what you have seen when the basil seeds are put in water. So wherever this the cross-linking is happening, this gel is sitting there. So some questions that we have here is, as I said, all biological macromolecules, when they are networked or cross-linked, they show the strain stiffening behavior. Do pectin show strain stiffening behavior? Is it what is contributing to the mechanics of the cell wall in the case of plants as well? Similarly, is there any role? For example, we all know that plants, if we don't water for some time in the or in drought seasons, plants undergo severe stress due to drought implications. And we also know that if water is drying, if you go and put water, it will actually come back. So basically, there is some interesting implication there also. So physiological and molecular responses of cell wall to drought stress. So as I said, cell walls components you should keep in mind while thinking about this. And so water loss in plant tissues controls turgor pressure, and so this turgor pressure is what actually sucks water from the soil through the plant upwards. The cells has been shown to respond to these changes in turgor pressure by either relaxing or tightening the wall. I mean, this is a sentence, but at the same time, it is not physically not translated to what is actually tightening and relaxing. Okay, what component, what is contributing to it? So people have been investigating by taking out various components, and they have come out with some protein which is a part of the cell wall could be the component that is contributing to this tightening and relaxing. So etc. There are many hypotheses still around to figure out what exactly would be going on in the plant cell wall. Then the cell, as I said, the cell wall is composed of mostly water, and this fundamental, although often forgotten constituent, is a vital and integral component of wall structure functioning. So how it, so for example, when the plant dries up, so this is an example plant which we were using also to motivate us. This is known as a resurrection plant. So you can see that when it is in dry and desiccated condition, the picture in A here, it sits like this, and the minute you put it in water in the wet condition, it starts growing back again. So one question is like, many times when plants are dying due to drought, it's very difficult to resurrect them back, right? So this is the kind of cell structure that you see when it is hydrated, it is on the left-hand side, and when it is dry or desiccated on the right-hand side. So you can see the cell walls collapse when there is no wall, there is no water. So where is this water stored, and how is it giving mechanical strength to this plant cell walls? So the questions, as I said, are addressed, and we did some rheological experiment using a large amplitude oscillatory shear, which means our shear strains, which is shown in x-axis, is very large, up to 1000%, which gives some information about the kind of microstructure that could be sitting in the case of. There is some problem with the overlapping of, something happened while I'm showing this file. So don't worry. So basically, what we have observed that like other biological macromolecules like actin or effectin or other biological macromolecules, pectin is also showing what is known as strain stiffening. This is the low methoxypectin, which we have used in the lab to do these experiments. So what is meant by the strain stiffening here is, and also this graph has two curves here. One is known as the storage modulus, which is actually showing the stiffness of the material. So you can see that in the blue, which is R is equal to 3, when the calcium is high and calcium is low, this material is showing very entirely different behaviors. And this empty symbols here, the black one is again for low calcium, and blue one is for high calcium. So G double prime indicates how much the material is fluid like, and the G prime, which is the solid lines, are indicating how much of the material is solid like. See, in polymers, we see that materials are mostly viscoelastic, which means some part of it can show viscous nature and the other part is elastic. And the any dissipation due to any kind of mechanical stress is actually dissipated, which is actually shown in this curve here, which is nothing but the stress versus strain curve, which is given in a cyclical fashion. So if there is no dissipation, this line would have been a straight line. Instead, and if it is full dissipation, like in the case of a viscous, we all know that viscous materials can dissipate heat. It would have been a circle here, and when it is viscoelastic materials, they do show something like an ellipsoidal shape. Okay. Anyway, in this, this two inferences are there. There is dissipation happening. So this is at a particular strain that we have taken out this and looking at. So you can see that for a particular strain, if you look at this material is the low calcium containing gel is showing what is known as strain stiffening. It means the stress increases as a function of strain when you are deforming it. This is not what you observe in the case of normal polymers. If you are deforming normal polymers, they don't show this kind of an increase in stress with the strain. So we have to remember that we are talking about biological material, which is showing this behavior, which has a lot of indications. So basically, our muscles also show this kind of a behavior. So we looked at the microstructure, what could be contributing to this kind of a behavior using small angle neutron scattering, and obtain some inputs to understand what could be going on with this material. So so they do have different kinds of microstructure at low and high calcium, as you can see here. So this is a low calcium when this calcium goes and forms what are known as the egg box bundles. And these egg box bundles can be very stiff, and this polymer in this particular situation can behave like a semi-flexible chain network. So it is shown that semi-flexible polymer chain networks have they can actually accommodate some amount of deformation by transferring the load to this rod-like structures, which are so essentially the egg boxes here will be very rigid, and they can actually accommodate this kind of strains. Whereas in this case, when you increase the calcium concentration, they form these flexible networks, and which are single point networks, or a few dimers may be there here and there. But they are not going to accommodate that kind of deformation to that extent. I mean, the strain stiffening to that extent. So they have two different behaviors altogether. So to confirm this and whether there is any contributions from pectin chain conformation, so we added some salt to this while the gel is forming, and looked at the rheology. So you can see that when you add the salt, when there is no salt, this black thing shows that the dissipation is very high, and when you that you have the strain stiffening behavior that you can see here. And when you add some amount of salt, you can see that it moves to what is known as more of a strain softening like behavior, and it has again implications from the morphology. And so basically the salt is screening some of the charges on this material and not allowing the formation of these dimers. Okay. So as I said, it also has implications in dehydration and rehydration of pectin calcium gel. So we did some experiments with the same gels with R is equal to 0.5, which means it has the egg box bundle structures. And it also has strain stiffening characteristics. So this is the taking the gel and then allowing it to dehydrate at different rates. So to understand how it could be, and rehydrating them.
You have consumed 21 minutes.
Okay. Okay, I will be winding up soon. Yeah, so when you rehydrate, again, it takes to see whether how much it can go back to its original structure, or original swelling index. So here you can see that how much water it has taken up, and when you're drying up, you have a wet dry mass here, and then as a function of that, how the material is showing the strain stiffening or not. So you can see the strain stiffening index also changes. So the behavior decreases when the extent of dehydration and if you're rehydrating, it is also and the rate of dehydration. So both can significantly affect the plant's mechanical responses. Our little far-fetched conclusion, because we are not actually doing in vivo tests on plants to show this, but there are a lot of tests being done by people to show that plants do this kind of behavior, but they have not shown whether there is a strain stiffening which can be parallelly done to maybe running an experiment with pectin and then with but the problem is that to determine what could be the pectin, what is the kind of pectin, is this low methoxy pectin, what could be the methoxic content in, or the esterification content in that particular plant and particular part of the plant. So these are all different complexities in this problem. But in a general note, one can say that pectin shows this behavior, and this is a very important finding, I would say, because there are no work out there showing that pectin can undergo actually strain stiffening under these circumstances. So I would say that was one of the work. So then we ask this question: does this seed mucilage, which if you take directly from the seed and do the similar experiment, do they show this strain stiffening? So as you can see here in this picture, this is again mucilage taken out and done rheology. And we have compared the mucilage rheology with the pectins of different pectin rheology at different concentrations. And one can see that, they do show some amount of dissipation, as one can see in the case of dissipation means there is a peak in this G double prime by G prime. The intensity is low, but it's there. But these are the experiments still going on to also to confirm how much is strain stiffening or dissipation can happen in seed mucilage, for example. And the other question is like, with if you have a calibration with respect to different calcium levels, is it possible to elucidate what could be the calcium content or the cross-linking level or the type of egg box bundles that you see in mucilage, for example, to classify? So purely from mechanical data, is it possible to get some information about the mucilage which is produced by the seeds. So these are the experiments on that. So I'm summarizing here. So we did what is known as large amplitude oscillatory shear rheological studies, which can be used as a tool for investigating important components of plant cell wall polysaccharides, such as pectin, which is also present in seed and root mucilages. Similarly, strain stiffening observed in other biomacromolecular networks like alginate gels, fibrin, actin, collagen networks, agarose gels. All these people have shown that they do, exhibit strain stiffening. Is present in pectin also, which is present in plants, as I have mentioned already. And depending on the calcium levels, strain stiffening or softening can be varied in pectin. Similarly, water transport in plants could be strongly linked to this hydrogel behavior of pectin polysaccharides than other components like cellulose or hemicellulose or lignin. And the other work that we are pursuing currently is plants also exude, mucilage through the root. I think many people are not aware of it. Everybody thinks that plants take up water from the soil. Plants also release, a significant amount of water into the soil to nourish itself. Basically, they encourage a microbiota around the root system, and this also moisturizes the soil and lubricates the soil so that the root can actually penetrate through the soil medium. So there is a very there could be very interesting, rheological and physical properties and structural properties that we can elucidate here also. So we have currently a supported project that is running on finding root mucilage behavior and how it can be studied as well. That's all about our work.
Thank you. Thank you, Susie. Well, I learned about strain stiffening in pectin. The one immediate question that comes to my mind about any biological system is its diversity. And cellulose in one is different from cellulose in another.
Yeah.
In molecular, spectroscopic, chemical properties, and that's also reflected in physical properties. So I wanted to know what would be the kind of diversity that you visualize, or is this a kind of a gross generic phenomenon that you see in all pectins?
Yeah, as I said already, in the plant itself, in different parts of the plant itself, it could be varying. Okay, the nature of the pectin that is present. For example, fruits, when they are unripe, for example, the methoxy content is different, and when they ripen, they change, and also the pectin content will reduce, and they convert it into sugar. So that's why when unripe fruits, for example, they are very hard and they have a lot of functional properties from the mechanical properties provided by pectin and other components. So when they ripen, for example, they get in the presence of biological enzymes, they get converted to sugar. So they are no more going to be hard like that. They are soft and sweet it becomes. So there are a lot of other such changes that is going on in plants. So while growing, for example, a growing plant will have a different kind of pectin and different methoxy level. And the growing parts of the plant also will have, because they need to accommodate a lot of water. Whereas the older cells, for example, they push out and they develop secondary walls and things like that, where there is no pectin, for example. There is mostly only structural components like cellulose, hemicellulose. And as you said, genetically there can be variations and other variabilities present in it. But what we are saying is a fundamental property of pectin, which you can extract from many plants and also look at. But each plant, if you take the mucilage or if you look at the exudate, etc., it could be very different.
And there, all of these ionic effects that you study, I mean, we also study only with calcium. So why is it that it is specific to calcium?
It's maybe a very interesting question. I do not know. It could be evolutionary wise, so that's why I am very interested in this work, because calcium is running between, I mean, not just plants alone, right? In animals also, it's a very important component, right? So, for example, our muscular functions, brain functions, there are a lot of functions which are actually, we call it signaling. So you can see in plants also, they say that, there are two functions, which are two classes of functions served by calcium, for example. Okay, so it says calcium is an essential macronutrient, serves as dual function in plants, for example. One is structural component of the cell walls and membranes, and also it is an intracellular second messenger or a signaling agent. So in in animals, we mostly say that it is a signaling agent, all right, the calcium. But we also know that calcium is very necessary in our bones and other parts. But in, for example, functioning of muscles, calcium is a very important component, which is a structural function. I don't think there is elucidation correctly to show that, for example, this in this strain softening and hardening, which is happening in muscles also. Is there a link between, for example, calcium and the muscle fibers?
All right.
And water as well. For example, dehydration. We also know that dehydration causes muscles to be weak.
Sure.
Okay, these all have mechanical properties associated with it. So that's why I use the term calcium, water, and this biomicromolecule network.
All right, colleagues, are there questions? All right, if not, Susie, thank you. And let's move on to the next presentation, and that's by Ravi.
Thank you, Professor Pradeep. Let me just share my screen.
As you can see, it is 7:07, and so you have 25 minutes for the presentation. I'll give you a warning after 20 minutes.
Thank you. Can you see my presentation now?
Yeah, full screen. However, you have to make it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Good evening, everybody. And let me first thank Professor Pradeep for giving me this opportunity to present the work that we do in our lab. Earlier, I used to meet Professor Pradeep quite often in HSBA. I don't sit there anymore, at least for some time. So I don't see him quite often. Nice to see him today. So the topic of my presentation today is about designing materials for designing ceramic materials for certain applications. I would today focus mostly on the ceramic research that we do, which is more relevant for aerospace applications. So we also, whatever I'm going to talk today is also something that we continue to work with in our new center that we have established, which we call it as Ceramic Technologies for Futuristic Mobility. Just to give you a bird's eye view of what we focus in our lab is we develop ceramic materials. Of course, we do a lot of materials chemistry. We heavily depend on chemists to help us to begin with. We primarily focus on three different aspects of ceramic research. One is security. So what I mean by security is that we develop ceramic materials which are extremely stable at very high temperatures, which are supposed to withstand extreme temperatures and harsh conditions. So we develop such structural ceramics either in the form of coatings or as bulk bodies, primarily for the Vikram Sarabhai Space Center, located in Thiruvananthapuram, which is a part of ISRO. We have also been focusing on developing ceramic materials for energy and environment, and due to lack of time, I will not focus on that today. But as far as energy is concerned, we have been working with the IOFA Institute and St. Petersburg University in Russia, working on certain advanced dielectrics with very high dielectric constants and low dielectric losses for capacitor-based energy storage devices. On the environment side, we have been working on developing ceramic materials which can be used for including cleaning water, and for that we were working with University of Limoges, and for electrocatalytic applications we are collaborating with the University of Cologne. So I will not touch these two topics for want of time, but will focus only on the structural ceramics meant for aerospace applications. In my lab, we design ceramics and we obtain through precursor route. On the left-hand side, I show you a schematic where I show you how we make these materials. We produce precursors of desired precursors based on the kind of ceramic material that we would like to use for a certain application. Starting with monomer units, we make precursors, and then subsequently subject them to solid state thermolysis to obtain amorphous ceramics, and then depending on again requirements, we heat treat them into to obtain highly stable crystalline ceramics, thermodynamically stable crystalline ceramics. So which means that we can design at materials at the atomistic scale. And since we are engineers, we look at possibility of using these materials for certain applications. So it's important for us to also design these materials at the microstructural scale. I just show you one micrograph on the top, which is a highly porous ceramic, which can be used either for structural applications or functional applications, because they do have very high surface area, can also be meant for certain functional applications. The two transmission electron micrographs, which I show you here, are very beautiful. I show this quite often because this kind of micrographs typically tell us what can be used for high temperature applications. The one which you see on the left-hand side, where you see silicon nitride and silicon carbide, you see that these two crystals are in direct contact, so the grain boundary is clean. On the other hand, I show you another microstructure on the right-hand side, where you have silicon carbide and silicon nitride, which is sandwiched, and you have a sandwiched phase, which is a boron carbon nitrogen phase, which is again a design requirement to protect silicon nitride when you go to extremely high temperatures. So when we want to reach higher and higher temperatures, that is when we are looking at temperatures beyond 1500 degrees Celsius, beyond 1700 degrees Celsius, meant for certain class of space applications, we need to design materials which can be stable for an extended duration of time. So just to give you a very nice example of how ceramic materials can be designed to get certain properties. This is a temperature range that we deal with. So all our precursor synthesis and shaping, cross-linking all happen in the temperature range between room temperature to around 400 degrees Celsius. The pyrolysis can continue beyond 500, 600 degrees Celsius to around 1200 and 1300 degrees Celsius, depending on what kind of ceramics that we're dealing with. Of course, when we have to do annealing to get highly crystalline ceramics, we can go as high as 1800 to 2000 degrees Celsius. So this is the kind of temperature range that we generally deal with in the structural ceramics that we are working on. Our whole idea is to make, I mean, people who work in structural ceramics know that they have to deal with powder metallurgy route, and our interest is not to depend on powder metallurgy route, because powder metallurgy route, the problem is that you cannot make components, complex shapes, you cannot make large components, you cannot, for example, make coatings very easily, and so on. So our interest is basically the idea of going from precursor route to ceramics is this route is basically a route which helps us to deal with a completely powder-free process. It's a low-temperature processing process. If you want, for example, solid-state sinter silicon carbide, you have to go to 1900 or 2000 degrees Celsius, but we don't have to do that here. Of course, a good control on chemistry and microstructure is important. And of course, it's a highly interdisciplinary research with starting from chemistry to engineering. We have to deal with thermodynamics to understand the stability of certain phases at certain temperatures and pressures. So extremely interdisciplinary, and then it brings chemists, material scientists, and engineers together in bring out an application which is useful. So I think I'm actually giving talk to mostly chemists. I'm not a chemist, but as I said, I heavily depend on chemists. We have been working on mostly organosilicon polymers. We have primarily worked on non-oxide based, silicon-based materials like carbides and nitrides, carbonitrates, boron carbonitrates, and so on. And in recent times, we moved to transition metal oxides incorporated in a silicon oxycarbide matrix, primarily for cost reasons, because when you deal with non-oxide ceramics, you will appreciate the fact that it's extremely expensive. It's almost like maintaining a white elephant for us. Hello?
Yeah, you just you were
are you able to hear me?
We can hear you. I can hear you. You'll have to reshare.
Hello? Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Somebody else will have to speak. I am not able to reach him.
Hello. I think we can hear each other, Pradeep, but I'm not sure if Ravi can hear us.
Yeah, Ravi is not hearing. That is why. I mean, he's frozen now, as you can see. Ravi is frozen. Okay, you just got disconnected.
Sir, IIT network has issue.
Oh, is it okay? Suraj, are you in the lab?
Yes, sir. Here also we have internet problem. It was going and coming.
Okay. Tiju, are you in IIT or?
I am on campus, Professor Pradeep. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I think some places on campus we have an issue.
Actually, the internet is patchy even on my end, Professor Pradeep.
Oh,
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my presentation with one of the students, and in case the signal goes weak here, I'll ask him to present. Yeah.
yeah.
I will
Sure.
speak. I'll use the audio.
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Ravi, just now.
Yeah. I don't know. I got disconnected. I'm sorry.
There is a problem across the campus, we are just told. Can you please reshare your screen?
So let me just continue with my talk. Are you able to see the slide so that I can continue?
No, you'll have to reshare.
Okay, just a minute.
Maybe you can switch off the video.
I will switch off the video as well, yes.
Okay.
Can you see the slides?
Yeah, we are on slide number 5 or something.
Yeah. So I was discussing about our work on organosilicon polymers leading to various carbides and carbonitrates. So silicon carbide and silicon nitrates are well studied. In fact, the whole field got impetus from the work by Ejima in 1975, where he produced silicon carbide fibers using polycarbonylene. And since then, although this process is very well known, in fact, I must say that India is still finding it very difficult to make silicon carbide fibers for structural applications. In any case, I mean, we later on, we moved from just carbides and nitrates to silicon carbonitrates, hoping that silicon carbonitrates can be used for extreme temperatures. And I will show you in the next slide that such silicon carbonitrates, again, when you use polysiloxanes to make them, you can get silicon carbonitrate composites, that is basically containing silicon nitrate and silicon carbides at around 1500 degrees Celsius. But the problem is these are highly crystalline materials, but when you want to make these materials through a precursor route, you always have some free carbon. And depending on the amount of free carbon that you have, which is again depending on the functional groups attached to the polymer backbone, the silicon nitride decomposition reactions are governed by the carbon content that is available. For example, at temperatures below around 1400 degrees Celsius, silicon nitride is quite stable in the presence of free carbon. But the problem is when you go to temperatures above 1850 degrees Celsius and so on, silicon nitride can dissociate. But again, beyond 1500, already silicon nitrate can react with carbon to form silicon carbide with the dissociation, with the formation of nitrogen gas, which means the decomposition reactions are already active at 1500 degrees Celsius and above. So these materials obviously cannot be used at 1500 degrees Celsius and above. So therefore, that limits the high temperature application of silicon carbonitrates. And what we did was we proceeded further to add boron into the system. And we see that there's a remarkable improvement when we move from a silicon carbonitrate system to a boron modified silicon carbonitrate system. The boron modified silicon carbonitrate system is thermally stable till 2000 degrees Celsius, completely amorphous till 1700. So crystallization is resisted till 1700 degrees Celsius. And because of the addition of boron, I will also show you that the carbon activity is reduced to a large extent, which helps degradation of silicon nitrate to much higher temperatures. On the left-hand side, I show you the thermodynamic calculations of the stability of silicon nitride as a function of carbon content. And you will see that, of course, depending on the nitrogen partial pressure, the silicon nitride stability would increase to much higher temperatures if you are having a high partial pressure of nitrogen. But the point here is that if the carbon activity is reduced to a large extent, then the dissociation temperature or the silicon nitride stability would increase. So that's what we would expect, and that's what we wanted. So on the right-hand side, you see a simple TGA of a boron-containing polysilicene in comparison with a boron-free polysilicene, it is very clear that the boron-containing polysilicines do not show any kind of weight loss till around 2000 degrees Celsius, which means it's a quite promising material for high temperature applications. And we have made such boron-containing monomers, and subsequently such boranes, when they are subjected to ammonolysis, we can make such polyorganoborosilazane in the lab. And such boron-containing SABCN polymer precursors can subsequently be cross-linked and subjected to, say, solid-state thermolysis at around 1300 or 1400 degrees Celsius, when you get a completely amorphous boron carbonitride ceramic. And then if you heat it to around 1800 degrees Celsius and so on, you can see that the crystallization would start. On the left-hand side, you see the crystallization behavior of such materials. You can see that the material is quite stable till 1800, and only beyond 1800, the crystallization starts. And even the crystallites that they form, that is like silicon nitride and silicon carbide, are very, very fine. I mean, they are in the order of around 50 to 80 or less than 100 nanometers, distributed in a matrix of boron, carbon, and nitrogen. And that is the most interesting part of this microstructural design. I also wanted to let you know that the crystallization is strongly affected by the nitrogen partial pressure. As you see here, crystallization is resisted at higher nitrogen partial pressure. But that may not be technologically very relevant. But what is technologically relevant is it is possible to keep the material quite stable at extremely high temperatures, which can be useful for certain aerospace applications. Now, if you look at the simple, again, TGA, where the weight loss is recorded as a function of boron content, you can see how, with almost no boron content in the polysilicene, as you keep increasing to around close to 6-8% of boron, you have already achieved the target of keeping the material quite stable till 2000 degrees Celsius. And this is the kind of microstructure that I'm talking of. I showed this to you in the second slide. I would like to repeat once again. So what we have is, this is what I call as very good microstructural design in order to make a material stable by around 500 degrees Celsius more, what we could not have seen in silicon carbonitride. And how do we achieve that? We achieve that by simply having this boron, carbon, nitrogen turbostatic layers, which sandwiches several nitrides and carbides, and encapsulates the silicon nitride in such a way that the silicon nitride doesn't get decomposed. So this actually goes against thermodynamics. In fact, if thermodynamic calculations predict decomposition of silicon nitride at temperatures around 1800 and so on, but you will see that even at 2000 degrees Celsius, silicon nitride does exist, and that's what I showed you in the X-ray diffractograms. And what we believe is that this BNC phase, or the boron, carbon, nitrogen turbostatic layers, simply encapsulate the silicon nitride crystals and completely protecting them from any decomposition reactions. And therefore, the entire material in its entirety is quite stable till 2000 degrees Celsius. And there, you have the material easy to be used for such extremely harsh, temperature applications. And we have, we investigate a lot of their properties, mechanical properties, and I just show you the high temperature deformation properties of these materials, because these materials are used at extremely high temperatures and also coupled with loads. So we investigate these materials, subject them to a constant load of 100 megapascals and over a range of temperature. In fact, I have just shown you a prototypical example of one temperature, one load combination. Otherwise, typically we do at least three different temperatures and at constant load, and at one temperature and at 3 different loads. So at least you require 6 to 8 experiments to get some kind of an idea whether this material can be stable and can be used for an application over an extended period of time. And this experiment, the time scale here is 10 power 6 seconds. So we are talking about from the day we load the sample till the day we unload the sample, we are talking about 15 days for one single experiment. So if you want to make some engineering sense and also provide some useful data for materials engineers and say whether this material is useful or not, we require at least maybe 6 months of study only to get this data. But coming back to the science part of it, I just would like to say that even after about 300 hours of operation, the strain rates are low in the order of around 10 power minus 9. That means the material is hardly deforming. Even after say 300 hours of operation, the material is hardly deforming. So that's what it means when I say we are talking about strain rates in the order of 10 power minus 9 per second. And of course, the physics part is shown here on the right-hand side, where we basically say that the continuous decrease in the strain rate is primarily because of the squeezing out of the free volume in these materials. And we show that how strain rate is a function of the defect concentration and so on. I'll not go into the mathematics part of it, but I would like to summarize our deformation behavior in these materials in this one single plot, which gives you an idea of what is the kind of strain rates that we talk of. We are talking about strain rates in the order of around 10 power minus 9, which is extremely important. For example, if you take a jet engine produced by GE, we are talking about strains in the order of around 0.1%. So if you can make sure that your samples do not strain or deform beyond 0.1%, then the material is stable. Anything beyond 0.1% means it leads to failure, and you cannot imagine failures in such aerospace components, because we are talking of something like, even if you talk of one space launch, one satellite would cost you around anything between 150 to 200 crores, and one launch would again cost around close to 200 crores. So we are talking about 500 crores for one launch, including spacecraft and the launch itself. So any failure means it's a disastrous thing for as far as the cost aspect is concerned. And remember, this whole operation is about for any given launch, it is for about work that takes around 1 year to prepare for the launch. And hence qualifying these materials for certain applications is extremely important. And ceramics being always very difficult to deal with, one has to make a lot of qualifying tests to make sure that these do make sense to us. And I just wanted to highlight this fact that the crystalline SABC in ceramics are well below this 0.1% what is suggested by GE at certain loads that we are discussing. But there is still some scientific understanding issues. Typically, people who know textbook problems on these topics, they know that typically they achieve a steady state, but we don't achieve a steady state here. This is scientifically still an intriguing problem. We still don't understand that completely. But anyway, we know at this point of time that the matrix governs a primary load, as although we work on composites, we have silicon carbide, silicon nitride in the matrix. Still, the matrix plays a very important role in the deformation behavior. And we also calculate the viscosity at these temperatures. So we are talking about viscosities in the order of 10 power 16 pascal seconds. So that means, what it means is that at 1400 and 1500 degrees Celsius, when they're subjected to such high temperatures and loads, they're still solid, because this is the defining viscosity level between solids and liquids. So they are still they behave like a solid with almost no deformation, even after 300 hours. So that's what we noticed.
Devi, you have consumed 21 minutes. I know that we have lost 2 minutes, okay?
I will finish in a couple of 3-4 minutes. Anyway, so we have been working on such non-oxide ceramics, but as I said, non-oxide ceramics are extremely expensive. So in recent times, we have been working on transition metal oxide incorporated in some silicon oxycarbides and carbonitrides of various kinds. What I show you here, some of them are meant for structural applications, some of them are meant for photocatalytic and electrocatalytic applications. In fact, this is a system. In fact, we had some very interesting results I don't have time to show. In fact, we also showed that they are plasmonic in nature, and they can be considered as a plasmonic, refractory kind of ceramic composites, which can be again used for some. We have actually published a paper in Metals Design on photocatalytic properties of such plasmonic titania in silicon oxycarbide matrix. But anyway, the point is that we are now looking at making these materials much cheaper and relatively easy to handle, and so that we can get more or less similar kind of properties. And again, as engineers, we would like to see whether these materials we don't want them to fail. So we look at their fracture resistance. We calculate the fracture resistance from very atomistic point of view. We call this as crack opening displacement. It's a very time consuming effort. In fact, it's a very time consuming effort. You have to measure the crack opening from the origin of the crack till a certain point, so that you have sufficient data points so that you can get the stress intensity, critical stress intensity factor, or fracture toughness, what we call it as. And typically it's in the order of around 1 ampere root meter, not very high. So that is where we are still working at improving their fracture properties. Last but not the least, we have now been focusing a lot on ceramic fibers, and we are primarily looking at structural fibers. What is the motivation? The motivation is simple. Silicon carbide fiber was first produced by Yajima in 1975, but India is not able to make silicon carbide fibers yet, which means we are not able to go to 1800 degrees Celsius or 2000 degrees Celsius ceramic composites in our space applications. We are not able to do, because silicon carbide fibers is under embargo. Nobody sells it to us, and it's extremely expensive as well. It's around 80,000 euros per kg of silicon carbide fibers, and there are only 4 companies in the world which make it, out of which 3 companies are in Japan. So India is still not successful. India is still struggling hard to make such silicon carbide fibers. So we are, in our lab, we have taken this as a challenge. Of course, I cannot produce maybe papers, but I feel that it's a technological challenge that we have to address, which will be very useful for the space industry. So right now, in our lab, we have been, in recent times, we have been able to make a silicon oxycarbide monofilament. It's still very stiff. It's still a long way for us to go to make them into a spool of fibers, which can be used for reinforcement for ceramic matrices. This is still that we are yet to do, but at least we have made the beginning, that we are able to make it right now in the lab. We have also recently, in this process, we also developed an ultra spinner. We call this as ultra spinner, but it's a simple centrifugal spinning setup. With a UV light possibility where you can make polymer fibers, fiber mats you see here, and we convert them into ceramic fibers. Not typically meant for structural applications. In fact, we filed the patent only yesterday. So we are able to make such polymer fiber mats and convert them into ceramic fiber mats. Not meant for structural applications, but they could be used for several functional applications possibly. Just to give you an idea that how these fibers work. In fact, this was an idea that came in the night 6 months back. We just invested money from our pocket. We thought, let us try to build it. We built it. Anybody is welcome to the lab in NAC to see how this. You can see. I don't know if you can see the fibers. It's a high throughput machine, not like the electrospinning machine. It's a high throughput machine. Within 10 minutes, possibly you can get a very big mat of polymer fibers which can be converted to ceramics. So this is something that I'm proud to inform. I should thank my postdoc Ganesh Babu and Raghunath Sharma, PhD student who worked on it for 6 months from conceptualization to building the setup. Just to give you an idea of what kind of fibers we have already made, these are tantalum oxide fibers. He's working on some electrocatalytic applications for this. Right now, Raghunath is working on it, and we are able to make some tantalum carbide fibers. Of course, the fiber is not very long. It's a short fiber, but tantalum oxide fibers, you can see it's a mat that we can make very easily without any difficulty. And here you can see that we have also made silicon carbide fibers. As I said, predominantly meant for functional applications. One last but not least, I'm happy to share that this is a setup that we have developed again in Central XRD lab. This was primarily meant for investigating properties of ceramics at very small length scales. In fact, many times it's very difficult to get a commercial machine to test them under multi-axial conditions. So one of my students, Lalit, I think struggled hard for about 5 years, and he has been able to make this. It's a very nice setup where you can subject them to multi-axial conditions. You can in situ do XRD. You can see a diffractometer on top, which can be used to record data, X-ray diffractograms, and used for specific purposes. You also have a camera below. You cannot see here in the schematic. I can show you that there's a camera below. So it's an in situ experiments where it can capture strain, and where X-ray diffractometer is integrated. And we can also integrate with say a Raman spectrometer. We can integrate it with other spectrometers as well and do in situ experiments. But this whole point actually triggered from the fact that we wanted to obtain single crystal elastic constants, which is very difficult. And we are now able to make single crystal elastic constants. We are able to do it from polycrystalline samples. In fact, we just got success last week when my student has been able to do it for entropy stabilized oxides. For the first time, we have been able to demonstrate determining single crystal elastic constants using the fixture that we have developed, and which has been integrated with the diffractometer and with this in situ camera, which could capture the strain and obtain them. I have a video, but I don't know whether I have time for that. I will skip the video because this video is available on YouTube. One can have a look at it. I would like to thank all my students, who have been instrumental in making me think all the time and so on. All that I've realized is that I have become old with time from 2013. Of course, I joined in 2007 and I've grown old. But I think staying with students and interacting with them is always a pleasure. Keeps us mentally young at least. Thank you.
Well, very nice. That's the intense struggle. The story of that struggle is what you presented to create materials of this kind. And the fact that one can study those materials at a single fiber level with a lot of scattering techniques associated with it. I would have loved to see some spectroscopy along with it to do some Raman and fluorescence and such other things, although this material doesn't fluoresce, but
we can still do, Professor Pradeep. We can still integrate it with Raman. We have right now integrated with a diffractometer in Central XRD lab, in HSB. So we can simply bring a Raman, or this is a movable one. In fact, we can move the entire setup with the camera, which has a computer interface. Everything can be moved to the place, and we can move it to any place and integrate it with a Raman, for example, and do in situ experiments. We can do that.
Yeah. So also, you showed very interesting interface behavior, how you can monitor that, that is very, very nice. And that is where spectroscopy becomes very useful, this interface engineering. Now, yes. as I look at it, the very same science that you just now talked about, there are a whole range of other high temperature materials.
Yes,
you touched upon a few of them, like tantalum and things like that.
Yes, yes.
So, what direction are you? What's the new thing in that?
Okay, right now, what we are doing is we predominantly worked on silicon-based materials for a very long time, and in the meanwhile, we have realized that it has its own limitations when we use it in real applications. So we are now moving to completely non-oxide and non-silicon-based systems. Working on rare earth oxides, and we are also looking at Indian Rare Earths Limited, which provides us necessary materials, which is quite cheap. In fact, we don't want to depend on sigma Aldrich or alpha Ether, which is very expensive. We are looking at precursors and raw materials from Indian sources so that everything can be produced here, which will also be inexpensive for us. So right now the direction is we are working on non-oxide and even oxide-based, but non-silicon-based materials using rare earths, and for the same high temperature applications. And right now we are providing such ceramic coatings for on metals and ceramics for VSSC for the high temperature materials program.
Thank you. You have consumed a whole lot of time. Sachin, you have a question.
Yeah, I hope that you guys can hear me. So thanks, Ravi. This is a very interesting and totally new thing, right? So you have to kind of pardon me for my question. I mean, the couple of these are very basic. So what is the size range which you are kind of dealing with when you talk about this analysis?
Size range means size range of what?
The particles of the, this metal or the structures which you are talking about.
The fibers, for example.
Yeah.
Oh, fibers, for example, the centrifugal spinning setup can make extremely long in meters. The fibers can be in meters. So, and because we can make a fiber mat very easily. In fact, if you come to the lab, I showed the video, but it may not be very clear to see. You can make it in meters, no problem. And if you're talking about other ceramics, we are talking of bulk ceramics, no powders. In fact, we are directly transforming the polymeric precursor to ceramic. So completely avoiding it's a powder-free process. So that's what I said, it's a powder-free process. We are not looking at powders at all.
I see, okay. And Ravi, could you please just go to your slide number 8, if you don't mind?
Yes, I will do. This one?
So when you are talking in terms of this, the different in the different ceramics, right? So I was just wondering, how much this weight change in the percentage because of just the temperature can cause. So what could be the basic process that you could really see, after a certain temperature, you have almost like 30% weight difference, right?
Yeah.
it because of some sort of a molecular structure is
Yeah,
what
yeah.
it-
See,
sort of a rearrangement or so something?
let me just briefly answer that question. We obtain ceramics through precursor route. It's a polymer precursor. It's a pre-ceramic polymer. So the decomposition or the weight loss is because of the organic components that which get decomposed off. So so we are looking at so this decomposition is primarily the organic to inorganic transition that happens. And beyond that, whatever, so when you have a plateau here, that means the conversion has already happened. I mean, it is a ceramic now, and it is there's no decomposition reaction.
Okay, Ravi, we'll have to take this later. Sundar, can you take that question? Yeah.
Okay, sorry, Sachin. I've just quick clarification. Ravi, what is the typical mass you need for like a tantalum and all those boron stuff to get this? I mean, in terms of milligram, can you think of it?
See, we are looking at more than milligrams because we have to make them for real structural applications. Milligrams will be always very easy for us.
So you need what is the amount? Like if I need to give you something to see whether you can make all those related to tantalum, niobium with boron, do you think you can get something with that?
Yes, yes.
A simple question is that if he gives you some few milligrams of a tantalum boride, can you make those interesting fibers?
Oh, if you give me boride directly, I cannot make fibers. If you tell me what kind of fiber you want to make, then we will find out what pre-ceramic polymer I have to use to convert that into ceramic. We make the polymer pre-ceramic polymer ourselves, and we spin it and convert them into ceramic fiber.
No. To do this experiment, what would be your typical amount you need to start this?
Maybe a few milligrams should be fine. I mean, that's
okay. Yeah, I got the answer. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Maybe we'll talk later with you.
Yeah, we'll have to continue this discussion. Sachin, please, please catch him. Let's move to the last talk of the day. That is, so we have Tiju.
Yes, Professor Pradeep, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, all right, good.
Connectivity.
So let me just start.
So as you heard, I will give you a sign after 20 minutes.
Yes. Are you able to see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay. Now?
Not yet.
Okay. It's loading on my end.
We cannot see yet.
You're not able to see? Okay.
Using a phone?
I'm using an iPad actually. I'm sharing the screen right now. Screencasting. Okay. Now you must be able to see, no, Professor?
Not yet.
Okay. Saurav, can you share the screen if you don't mind? Saurav, you're here?
Saurav Ghosh?
Yes, Saurav Ghosh. So, Professor Pradeep, if you could allow him to
Yeah, he is.
Screencast.
Yeah, he is doing that.
Okay.
Saurav, you have to make it full screen and then let's keep going. Yeah, okay, good. Can you see, Tiju? We are on slide number 1.
No, I'm not able to see. There's some issue on my end, actually. Saurav is already presenting, is it? Okay. Could we go back to the previous slide? Yes. Thank you, Saurav. So good evening, all of you, and nice to be here. And we are in the last segment of today's meeting. I'll be giving a talk that is primarily focused on theory-experiment interface in the context of work that we have been carrying out here on our campus. And primarily, the sectors that we have been focusing on is clean energy and water. And these are the areas I usually work on. There's energy-water nexus, clean hydrogen, that is both green and blue hydrogen, then energy storage and materials design. We very often use a multi-scale approach. And we also, of course, explore device implementation and develop systems also. Next slide, please. Because this is a rather broad audience, I wanted to start with something very, very generic. And I will also try to make this presentation as accessible as possible. So as citizens of a campus that is comprising of very many departments, one thing that would come across if you sit in doctoral committee meetings and so on is the fact that the theory, computation, and experiment interface is very different in different branches of science and engineering. In disciplines like mechanical, electrical, and so on, the theory and experiment are always intertwined. So those disciplines, it does seem like they are more mature when it comes to theory, experiment, interface. And a question that I would consider to be an evocative question for audience that might be interested in material science would be the following. Do you think, knowing what you know about material science and engineering, or if that's the area you're working on, if this discipline or trade is mature enough to connect the theory to the experiment? And this is an evocative question. I mean, we don't have to necessarily consider this to be a provocative question. Okay, so this is one question that I would like to answer in some way over the course of the next few slides. Next. So materials prediction and towards system implementation. So we will go through some examples here. Next. So this is an example of a prediction that was made a few years ago. And primarily, the context of this prediction was we were chasing materials that are direct band gap and which would ideally provide us with Shockley quasar efficiencies. What does that mean? It means that it would ideally have direct band gap of roughly 1.1 electron volts. And the reason why it is particularly interesting is because you can demonstrate that at that band gap, you will be able to get maximum single junction photovoltaic efficiencies. And we were able to explore combinatorially, computationally, few compositions. To begin with, it was data driven. Later on, it was driven by ab initio simulations. And we were able to predict that there are potentially some aluminum indium compositions out there, aluminum indium ferrite compositions to be more specific, which can offer Shockley quasar limits. Next slide, please. So that paper was, in fact, completely computational work. Now, subsequently, we found that this material, not very surprisingly, but at the same time, quite hearteningly, has a magnetic order, and its ground state is orthorhombic. And in the orthorhombic phase, it is magnetic. What does this mean? It means to say that you can potentially leverage this when it comes to system deployment. And the fact that it is on one hand likely to give Shockley quasar efficiencies, and on the other hand is also very likely magnetic, means it is useful, plausibly, for making photocatalysts that would be perfectly recyclable. Particularly so because ferrite surfaces are known to be quite stable. Next. So here is the experimental validation for which I ought to thank Bhuvana, who worked for almost a couple of years to get stable phase and this particular phase and so on. So you can see that we now make aluminum ferrite in our lab, and in fact, a wide range of such compositions exist, but this is a representation of what we have gotten, and you will find that it is a perfectly single phase. Next slide, please. And it has a direct band gap. Aluminum ferrite standalone has a band gap in terms of predictions of 2.6 eV. In practice, it is 2 electron volts. Please note that this is somewhat anomalous. It is unusual because typically it's the other way around. The approximations that go into simulations, such as the one that I showed you earlier, are such that very often it results in underestimation of band gap. But here we are actually overestimating the band gap when compared to the experimental value. And it is a puzzle why it is so, and we are exploring that currently. And on the positive side, you will find that it's clearly weakly magnetic, and it has a magnetic moment that is somewhat interesting, particularly if you are interested in recovering these particles, let us say, from dispersions. Next slide, please. So we have been deploying it for wastewater treatment. And in fact, it seems to be active both in visible as well as ultraviolet light. It seems to work quite well for both anionic and cationic dyes of the kind that we tend to be worried in our country. And you will find that the recyclability of the catalyst is excellent. Most of the degradation efficiency decline that you see with respect to the number of cycles is entirely attributable to the retrieval efficiency. The particle as such behaves in terms of its recyclability better than TiO2. Next, please. So that is not it alone. You need to also think about whether these particles, when they are used for water treatment, end up leaching into water, as a consequence giving rise to concerns that might be of relevance to further treatment. But it turns out that this is perfectly leaching resistant. There's no leaching at all. And in fact, we carried out certain biotoxicity tests in our biotech department in Professor Mukesh Doble's lab. And we found that these materials are totally leaching resistant. Next, please. So the question is, can we do even better in terms of getting photocatalytic action, water treatment action, by turning to plasmonics? And there's another area that we have been exploring. And in fact, Professor Ravi Kumar had mentioned that he ran into an interesting plasmonic-like behavior for one of his materials. Here also, you will find that we are actually exploring somewhat novel plasmonic systems. Why are plasmonics interesting? Because potentially they can give you an antenna effect when they are deployed on top of photocatalysts. Next slide, please. All right. So this was something that we found rather interesting about aluminum indium nanoparticles. So what we did was we did multi-physics simulations, and we demonstrated, number one, that these aluminum indium particles, they are almost completely invariant with respect to their refractive indices when it comes to their composition. That means you could go through the full binary phase diagram in principle, and you would not see a much difference in terms of their n, k values. That means the real and imaginary parts of the refractive index. And at the same time, they can be arranged and organized in order to, in principle, cover most of the visible as well as the UV, most of the visible as well as NIR part of the solar spectrum, which is the figure on the right-hand side bottom. And this was reported in Material Science and Engineering B. Next, please. So furthermore, we have been looking at core shell nanoparticles, and we call it core shell computational combinatorics, wherein what we have actually done is we have demonstrated in particular that these core shell particles, if that is aluminum when covered with copper in particular, it turns out that it ends up, number one, chemically you can expect it to be more stable and not having an oxide like the one that in particular you would be worried about in the context of aluminum nanoparticles standalone. Aluminum nanoparticles standalone do not survive in water, but aluminum coated with copper, they do survive in water, and they stay pretty long even in atmosphere. So these particles as a consequence are very interesting from the point of view of our plasmonic applications, and it turns out that they give a very strong resonance between 500 to 700 nanometers, which is quite nice from the point of view of visible light harvesting. Next, please. So that is not yet alone. It turns out that those core shell nanoparticle structures, simulating them can actually be very difficult. So what we did in between was we developed our own algorithm for being able to map a core shell particle to a homogeneous particle computationally. And then what we have been doing is we have been placing it on top of semiconductor slabs and seeing how these semiconductor slabs will start absorbing light in a more efficient manner. We have a metric that we define, weighted average metric, which we use to determine the improvement in the photon absorption. And we used a transfer matrix model, which is primarily drawn from optics, classical optics that is. And we found that in the context of amorphous silicon, for instance, you can actually improve the efficiency by something like 3 or 4% just by appropriate loading of these aluminum copper systems. And similarly, one could actually do simulations for a wide range of these interfaces. All right. And right now we are exploring an interface with oxynitride. And the reason why we are doing that is because for a long time we have been looking at oxynitrides from the point of view of band gap engineering. So now is an interesting opportunity to dab these nanoparticles on top of those ferrite systems for, let us say, water treatment. And on the other hand, to dab them on top of real photovoltaic devices and perhaps even novel photovoltaic devices, perhaps devices made by using oxynitrides. And those are the kind of activities that are ongoing currently. And these are all cases wherein, as you can see, that computation and theory in one way or the other have guided our experiments. Next. So currently, it turns out that in the roof of MPS, these materials are being tested. We are setting up a pilot plant for testing these materials. So not only will we be using sunlight, but we'll be actually using heliostats to get concentrated solar power. And the eventual goal is to start with something like gray water, the kind that comes out of your kitchens, for instance, to get potable distilled water by using plasmonic distillation on one hand. And prior to going there, trying to make sure that we use our aluminum ferrites and so on in order to make sure that the organic pollutants are gotten rid of. Next slide, please. So here is another case study. So I would say the first one was one case study wherein theory and computation guided experiments. And you can see from the previous slide that we were essentially trying to move towards systems, demonstrating it in pilot scale. Here is another case wherein we'll start with a computational prediction and move towards experimental validation in materials, and finally end with device implementation. Next slide, please. So the thermochemical backdrop for this is something that was set up by Kaushika, who is a senior PhD student. And she and me, we have been deriving primarily what are called as bond balance interatomic potentials. I won't give the details here, but certainly at some other point, I'll be happy to have a one-on-one discussion, detailed discussion regarding the same. It certainly is within the classical regime, and but in the context of oxynitrides, they are not very well described. And it turns out that a big fraction of her PhD went into being able to capture this in the context of certain oxynitride materials, certain materials families. And what we found was that in the nano regime, if you make these nanoparticles, you could potentially run into compositional instabilities, which of course we in one way or the other expect, but we are able to quantify these instabilities. Next, please. Now, the instabilities can be quantified in very many ways. One proxy way of quantifying it would be to look at something like specific heat as a function of temperature. And you would find that as you go further and further down in size and with respect to temperature, you start seeing additions to CP, which primarily indicate that there are some soft phonon modes that are being introduced into these particles, in particular on the surface. But that's not it alone. It turns out that there are also there is also evidence for vacancy formation in these systems. And now coupling this with the fact that we expect vacancy laden particles to be good from the point of view of electrochemical energy storage, the question we started asking was, is it possible for us to use this paradigm to predict dopants within some systems, including the kind of systems that, let's say, Professor Ravi Kumar was talking about, the kind of systems that, let's say, IRL produces here in our country and so on. Next slide, please. So in that context, we developed an adapted version of something called the Mott-Littleton method. So the adaptation was as follows. So if you want to capture the thermochemical detail, in particular the enthalpy of vacancy formation, let's say, in these kind of systems, you can divide a particular defect and its neighborhood into two parts. And there is some detail to how you divide it and so on. But if you do that cleverly enough and look for the right numbers, it turns out that you can actually get the enthalpy in a very, very computationally efficient manner. And in fact, these computations are something like 10 times faster than conventional all electron calculations and so on, because as I said, this is in the classical regime. And what we found is that we find values, enthalpies that are close to what would be otherwise predicted by DFT and so on. And wherever there is an experimental value, we are within plus or minus 1 electron volt in terms of accuracy. For these high binding energy systems, that is considered to be fairly good. Next, please. Now, Saurav, could you go back? Because I would like to just add one more thing. So one of the things we were chasing here was the development of a single predictor to find out whether a certain dopant would, in principle, help in the creation of oxygen vacancies or not. Okay? And of course, you could look at it quasi-chemically, but that is not sufficient. You will certainly need to know the delta H values also. So next, please. So the prediction here was, of course, that you will find that chromium, in this particular test case, that is, chromium and europium, both of them would certainly introduce oxygen deficiencies in Syria. But that is not it. Based on the delta H values, we found that chromium in particular would introduce more oxygen vacancies when compared to europium. And certainly both of those materials would have larger oxygen vacancy concentration when compared to standalone pristine Syria. And this was verified later on by using XPS, making the material an XPS. Of course, I understand that some of you may say that it's a purely surface chemical phenomena, but it does seem to corroborate with other results also that we've reported in this particular paper. Next, please. So the experimental validation. So as I said, we were trying to come up with a single predictor approach to coming up with the right dopants that would make Syria a better energy storage material. And here you find the results. So previously you saw that chromium enhances the oxygen vacancy concentration in Syria, and that would inevitably translate to a higher specific capacitance in measurements such as this one. And you will find that this particular chronopotentiometry clearly indicates that chromium doped Syria is providing greater specific capacitance. This is the work of Saurav Ghosh, who is co-advised between Professor Rangarao and me. Next, please. So in summary, we started with a prediction, we verified it, and finally, we have in fact implemented it in a device and so on. Right now, we are optimizing the leakage currents and so on for this particular device. Next, please. So the device implementation details are as follows. So we made a symmetric cell based on this, and the voltage stability windows and also self-discharge behavior was studied. Very important from the point of view of understanding the leakage behavior. What is rather nice is that it has fairly high rate capability. And not only that, this also seems to be fairly robust in terms of its cyclability. Next, please. So 10,000 cycles, and you barely see any capacitance fading. So now what we are doing is we are trying to develop a test rig for this particular system. So we are trying to come up with a module that can be built on the device that we showed in the previous slide, that the devices that we tested in the previous slide. So that test rig is being developed currently. Next, please. So the major take homes I would say are that there are fresh synergies that are possible between theory, computation, and experiment. Material science and engineering too is entering an era of maturity where there is stronger linkage that is possible between computation and experiment. In principle, materials design that is almost entirely data-driven is possible for certain materials classes at the very least. Clean water and energy nexus is truly trans and multidisciplinary, and it offers a very good case for nudging high throughput materials discovery approaches, such as the ones that I actually have shown here. It is about the right time for material science and scientists and engineers to start thinking about Industry 4.0 in the context of materials. What do I mean? What I mean is, the current prevailing industry is called 3.0 across the world in terms of its automation, mechanization, prediction, the utilization of models, and so on. But I believe that in the context of material science, which has been very, very empirical, we have entered into an era wherein there can be a digital transformation in terms of how we go about selecting materials, producing materials, and creating value out of materials by using approaches and paradigms like was indicated here. And for more about the theory experiment synergy that has come out of the group, I would invite you to look at Santosh Behra's thesis. He recently defended his PhD. In fact, his PhD resulted in a new tolerance factor for perovskites. Very exciting, because this new tolerance factor actually helps you predict whether there are certain distortions that are possible, and hence requires you to do fewer experiments. It's no longer going to be hit and trial as we go forward. Secondly, he was also able to show crystal structure prediction. This was a data-driven approach that we adopted. And finally, he also predicted dopant amphotericity very efficiently and used it in the context of light-emitting materials. Again, for want of time, I won't go into all those stories, but I hope I have given you a few test cases, a few case studies, wherein you can see that we have, I think, entered into a new era of computation experiment synergy in the context of material science and engineering. Next, please. So many thanks to Dr. Sudha Bhuvana for working on the water treatment aspects, Dr. Taluri and Dr. Santosh Behra for working on the theory side of things. Next, please. Kaushika, who developed the bond valence potentials for barium tantalum oxynitride. Saurav, who is advised between Professor Rangarao and me, who works on supercapacitors. And then the systems part, Sandeep is working on. Next, please. Arvind, Abhimanyu, and Tahir, all of them worked on plasmonics. So the plasmonic predictions, etc., that I showed you come from their work. Next. Naveen and Adityan, thanks to both of them as well. Adityan, along with Bhuvana and team, are in fact setting up the equipment, the pilot plant in MPS, on MPS roof. Next, please. So special thanks to all the colleagues and collaborators. I'll just pause here for a bit, and all the funding agencies and industry that have been working with our group in one way or the other. So next slide, please. Many thanks. These are my contact details. If there are any questions, you are welcome to ask me now. My URL is given here as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Very nicely, lucidly presented, and diverse topics and connection between theory and experiments brought out very well, and also pointers to Industry 4.0. So very, very nicely done. Are you all right physically?
On and off. I've been having some issues.
Okay. So anyway, well, anyway, I didn't want to tax you too much, but then I didn't realize that it could have been earlier or something. I didn't realize that. One point I wanted to ask you was that, well, just let me ask one question and then move on. Aluminum, plasmonics of aluminum alone, this lady, well, in Rice University, people have been, Naomi Hellas, and people have been looking at this. And some specific shapes, aluminum cubes and aluminum such structures are shown to be far better than this. And towards, you then subsequently talked about aluminum, indium, nanoparticles and associated behavior, plasmonic behavior. I was wondering whether there is some interesting morphology dependence here, because aluminum and both aluminum and indium belong to the same group, and so there can be interesting synergies. What did you see in that?
Yeah, so Professor Pradeep, even without simulation, I would say that if you have a structure that has lesser symmetry than the spheres that we are dealing with, the sphere is infinitely symmetric. But as you start breaking symmetries, you will start seeing more and more resonances in your n, k dispersions. So that is given. There is no need to, I mean, that is something that we know directly from theory.
Right.
And then the question is, what combination of shapes and sizes can we actually combine in order to do good solar energy harvesting? I mean, so there are challenges associated with getting these fancy shapes. I mean, it usually involves a set of surfactants. It usually involves very long reflux periods and so on. However, the materials that we selected, they were such that they came off, in fact, the work of Abdul Malik, who was co-advised between Professor Edamina Prasad and myself, who accidentally stumbled upon the stability of copper coated with aluminum. And as a consequence, in some sense, stirred me to start thinking along these lines. It turns out that getting these low symmetry structures are very hard. And it, in some sense, makes it harder for the industry to sort of see promise in this. So I wanted to start with something that I could potentially just put on a PV or on an oxynitride, or in this particular case on amorphous silicon, and test out immediately and still get some excitement from technology groups. And that's precisely what happened. So, but on the other hand, academically, we could certainly explore these low symmetry structures, explore geometries, explore the ways to make polymeric units out of them in, let's say, heptamers, and so on, because our predictions seem to show that heptamers in particular are, again, very good from the point of view of covering solar irradiance and so on. So we could go in those directions, certainly. And I'm not fully aware of the work that is going on in RICE, but I'm aware of their plasmonic distillation work and
sure.
And so on. Yeah.
So I mean, of late, Naomi Hellas has been looking at aluminum based surface enhanced ramen and such other.
Yeah.
So related to these the solar related applications.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's take other questions.
Yeah.
So Pradeep, I have one question. Did you?
Yeah, please carry on. Yeah.
Has anybody looked into the long-term stability of these nanoparticles in the context of solar energy harvesting?
Yeah. So
the question is basically, when you keep the same nanoparticles for solar harvesting energy, solar harvesting for an extended duration of time, would there be any changes?
Yeah. So Ravi, yes and no. In the context of gold in particular, Panasonic has been looking at the possibility of having gold nanopyramids on the surface of amorphous silicon and crystal silicon structures. And it turns out that they can be very stable. But at the same time, nobody is willing to buy those. They are called black solar cells, in fact, because though they are coated with gold, it turns out that it absorbs so well that it's pitch black. But those black solar cells are actually very pricey because they have a lot of gold in them. And they are very stable. However, what happens is this Panasonic bottleneck is they have never been able to actually get buyers for it. So in that context, what we have been doing in our group, for instance, is trying to look at these non-noble plasmonic approaches, plasmonic materials, plasmonic combinations. And in that context, it seems like copper coated with aluminum will do well. Have we looked at its own stability over the course of, let us say, years or whatever? No, we have not. But it's possible to do accelerated aging studies, Ravi. And I think it is necessary even to do that. But in the context of gold, yes, there are some accelerated aging studies that are available. The second thing I would say is it is sometimes non-trivial because you are dabbing these metal nanoparticles on top of materials. And what happens at the interface depends very much on the lattices of the two and the compositions of both the nanoparticle as well as the substrate and so on. So I have a feeling that questions like what you are asking will have to be studied very thoroughly for a few very, very relevant directions, for a few very relevant material combinations. And right now we have good data only for gold silicon, not for aluminum silicon or aluminum oxynitride interfaces and so on are thoroughly in the exploratory phase. Perhaps very few people looking into it right now.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Ravi?
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? You're all welcome to ask me. I mean, I wanted to make this presentation as accessible as possible. So if you don't ask me questions, I'll assume I did not make it accessible. So.
Well, it is also that we are at 8.
It's very late. Yeah, very late, isn't it? Yes. Okay.
So one thing
Okay.
that is quite clear is, the synergy is really, not only this synergy of experiment theory, but also you brought out that interface with industry. That's very, very promising. And so
Yes,
maybe
yes.
at some point in time, you will also talk about economics. So that's
Yeah.
very
Yeah. No, techno-economics determines, I think, the synergy in one way or the other. For instance, this ferrite phase, I mean, we could have gone about doing a mind-numbing number of experiments, and it would have been very hard to arrive at something that could give you something like the Shokler-Quasar optimal efficiency. But now that we have this, we have done that sifting experiment computationally, and we have realized it experimentally. I mean, it be over a very short span, really. I mean, looking at it from the point of view of materials discovery. And then we are now testing it out on pilot. So that tells the promise of it. And if material scientists and engineers can sort of adopt this approach to materials discovery and implementation, I feel that it will certainly help the economy in so many ways. So.
Well, that's a great place to stop this today's session. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you to you. Thank you all for this wonderful session. Somehow we, the thing got thinner today. We normally used to have about 50 plus people, and that is probably because we overlapped with another lecture of Junjunwala, and so as a result, several others went for that. But then they could have rejoined. They could have at 7:30 or something. So thank you all. Thank you, and we'll meet next week.
See you, Professor. Yeah.
Thanks, Pradeep.
See you all. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.